So, Mark, John Dee was 007. I believe that's where it came from.
Yeah.
Code name.
Well, there's a lot to it, man. If people out there, I mean, a lot of people have never heard of John Dee. Certainly, people out there have heard of other names that I'm going to mention. One of which is John Doe, which is no one, Mr. Nobody. That's what his name was changed to, and pretty much everything, all his achievements were masked over. You know, it's like religion; it was divided up into different segments, so that the actual truth was hidden. John Dee was very much the case. We can call him John Dee, we can call him John Doe, we can call him Merlin, if you wish.
Yep.
All of which are relevant and all come from John Dee.
Merlin. Okay. Give us a little bit on Merlin. What's the connection there with Merlin?
Well, John Dee wrote the Tales of King Arthur. Everybody knows out there that King Arthur wasn't a real king. Some people still think he was a real king, and you know they're right to even think that, because what he wrote all the Tales of King Arthur about was so that they could claim Western land and Northern land in honour of the monarchy. They used it as a fear factor spread around Europe. So people, you know, in the Western world, some still believe that there was a King Arthur. If you go to America, you know, they're not unintelligent. They actually thought there was a King Arthur because it was portrayed that well. In order to claim land, you know, it's a lineage thing. But you know, he wrote the King Arthur. Arthur is actually this eldest son's name, who he based the king on.
Could I ask you a bit more about the 007 connection?
007 connection is simply that Elizabeth first held a court. All her closest people were standing next to Elizabeth I, and of course she was 001. She was number one. You know, she was the queen, and she gave everybody around her a number, and he got given the number of 007 or 007.
Right.
And he was in fact the first official, and that is absolute official, Secret Service agent on behalf of what he called the British Empire. The British Empire phrase was coined by John Dee. He coined that phrase. It all comes from his travels and everything like that. We can go on to his travels because they're quite bizarre. You know,
please move on to that.
What he done in his travels. There's a famous painting of Elizabeth I, of which you'll see if you look up the sorcerer for Elizabeth I. You'll see a painting of a sorcerer standing in front of Elizabeth I, and he's standing there and he's producing light out of this cup in front of her.
Right.
The painting itself got repainted, and if you look at the painting, it's got a big shadow movement over it, and the reason it's got that is because the original painting, he was standing in a pentagram with skulls around him. And what that actual picture is a seance that he done for the Anunnaki.
Okay.
Because the Anunnaki needed to find the compound called silicon.
Right. Yeah.
Now, when we're looking there, you know, silicon, 1500s, silicon. And John Dee stated there and then, after calling up Baphomet, Baphomet is a demon in his own right who works on control fear, and his speciality is children. Sounds a bit relevant to today, but
yes.
He called up Baphomet and offered up the whole of humanity in order to get the compound silicon, of which John Dee said it would take 400 years to fully find and develop this compound to where they need it. And sure enough, it's taken pretty much exactly 400 years. You know, people can say, like, you know, who is this John Dee? You know, was he an intelligent guy? Well, you know, he's got a degree. I mean, these are his list of degrees that he actually attained.
Sorry, before we go further, Mark, I just want to because obviously we've always been told it's gold. That's the main thing that we're mining for here.
Yeah, well, sure. He set out. He had a psychic because believe it or not, John Dee couldn't actually communicate with spirits very well. But he had a sidekick called Edward Kelly. And what they done is they set out around the world in order for this search for silicon.
Mm-hmm.
And what that led to was them going to Africa and starting the gold and diamond mining for minerals. Certainly a big mineral thing kicked off in America once they'd gone round the globe. But Francis Drake went round the globe the wrong way and discovered America again. And they started the mining in America for the same compounds and everything like that. What this led to is what we would call today the modern black slave trade.
Yeah.
They started that off as well. That was all started due to this search for silicon. So he started numerous things by doing his travels, and he didn't even travel on that thing to do that because he had so much important stuff to do in England at the time that he couldn't go on the actual travels, and that's why Elizabeth sent Francis Drake, who was, I believe, 004 in her little command.
All right.
Because they all had official numbers. To list his, degrees just quickly, so people get an insight into how intelligent this guy was. These are his degrees that he actually had degrees in. We've got Greek, Latin, philosophy, geometry, maths, astronomy, alchemy, geography, Satanism, divination, Hermetic philosophy, and Hebrew.
That's a lot of degrees.
They were his degrees. And he had all them by the age of 24.
Well, impressive.
By the age of 24, he got offered a fellowship.
Yeah, outstanding,
at the age of 9.
In fact.
He got an offer of fellowship in a college at the age of 19.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got offered a fellowship in Trinity College in Cambridge at the age of 24, which he is the first person to ever be offered fellowship there. Along with all the fellowships, when he travelled to France and Belgium, they were jumping over themselves offering fellowships at their colleges out there, because his lectures, when he went on his travels to Europe finally to expand his knowledge and gain more knowledge for himself, more importantly, he used to lecture to thousands of people, not just a room full or 100. He lectured thousands, and people used to travel from many countries to come and listen to John Dee speak.
I mean, in terms of infamousy, right? So you've got Aleister Crowley. This is where everyone knows about Aleister Crowley, but not John Dee.
In retrospect, he's about as powerful as John Dee's little finger.
Yeah, it sounds it.
To put it into some serious retrospect, this guy was no average person. He wasn't a person that popped up or anything like that. I mean, he was born into this. He was very much born into this and groomed. I mean, his family descend from Rhodey the Great, who was the Prince of Wales. That's where his original lineage comes from.
Right.
His father, Roland, made clothes and was an advisor for Henry VIII. He actually made Henry VIII's clothes and was the advisor for Henry VIII. So it all sort of stems from there.
He's like a significant piece to the puzzle. I mean, we've got, obviously, when we come to the biblical side of things, we've got the Book of Enoch, haven't we? That was hidden. It's like John Dee was hidden, like the Book of Enoch.
He was hidden, and to touch on Enoch, he even created a language which is yet to be deciphered today called Enochian. If people want to look that up and see what his Enochian writings are, they're all satanic and occultist writings, and he created the Monas hieroglyph. People won't recognise what it is. If they looked it up, they certainly would recognise the image of the Monas hieroglyph. His knowledge was just completely so more advanced than anybody around him, and certainly anybody today, I would say. Henry VIII's son, I believe it's Edward IV, don't quote me, but I know it's an Edward. He offered him immunity, which is a continuous payout for the rest of his life. He then went on to work for Mary, Queen of Scots, who was before Elizabeth, and he got put in prison due to doing a reading for Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots. He got accused of witchcraft and put in prison for 3 months. Now, bear in time, the Witch Hunter General wasn't yet formed. We'll get to that, but the Witch Finders were certainly there, and they were installed by Henry VIII due to Roland, his dad. They installed the Witch Finders. Now they killed witches straight away. But John Dee, no, he got locked up for 3 months until he was proven innocent of any undoing towards Queen Mary's deaths. So
Yeah.
Is he a lucky guy or is he a very special guy? That's the question that's there, really, sat out there for people to ask or ponder over, because that sort of thing didn't happen back then.
No.
We're talking in the days when court jesters said the wrong word, they got their head chopped off. It was as simple as that. Some of his actual achievements out there that people want to get out there to people, of what he actually installed in England, which stands today.
Okay.
The reason he had an abundance of books. When he used to travel abroad, he used to take up to 800 books with him, many of which he's written himself, including the Tales of King Arthur, of course. But he used to take these books abroad, and he had a library so vast in his collection that Cambridge University and Oxford University used to borrow his books, because he had more books than both those universities put together. And in fact, John Dee actually came up with the idea to devise, to get information out to people so that everybody had the chance to learn. He devised the thing called the library, which we now have today in every single sort of town around the UK and indeed the world. He invented the library because he wanted to get knowledge out there to people. He wanted people to be able to revise the way he does, not under a university area or under some sort of curriculum. He wanted people to have the freedom to revise like he did.
Sure. What did he push then? What was his sort of like his main area of study that he'd push on others?
They all used to study the same. They all used to do a collective study years ago.
Right.
Like in universities, they used to study maths, astrology, alchemy, Satanism, and geography or navigation, all as one subject.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they used to study in universities many years ago, like back in the 1500s. And he took all those subjects because he came up with the idea that if we focused on each subject individually, we can make a more powerful study on each subject. This is all to do with his search of silicone, of course. It's all for the purpose of greed, of why they wanted to put this information out there, because he realised that there were collective minds out there that could help. And so what he done was he divided all these subjects up in universities and got universities to study subjects individually, to focus on one single subject, of which one of them, alchemy, he took and he renamed doctrine.
Right.
Which we know as medicine. Well, when you think about it, medicine is a combination of different minerals and chemicals and everything like that. Well, that's alchemy. It's plain and simple.
Mm-hmm.
But he managed to install that around the whole country and indeed spread around the world. Everybody listened to John Dee, and it's just weird that no one. I mention to so many people, and they're like, "Who's that? Who is that?" And it takes a while for people to recognise just how potently powerful this guy was.
How he influenced people,
Well, there's just so many there's so many references to him if you search, if you look him up, but they're all scattered.
These people were probably unbeknown to these individuals. He was teaching Satanism, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah, he was. He was openly teaching it. It was an open method of teaching back then.
And it's like we've been taught all this stuff is absolutely a con. It's pretty much the same, isn't it? Yeah.
Everything is flipped on its head. Every bit of history that you've ever learned, is near enough the complete reverse of what it actually was.
Absolutely.
When you think about it, he's studying Satanism and stuff like that, but yet he started the Witchcraft Finders.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Witch Hunter General for witches. Well, weren't they to do with Satanism? No, they weren't. They were free-thinking people. They were light seeds. They were
herbalists. They were
herbalists. Yeah, they were just harmful people.
Healers, natural-born healers.
Some of the things that John Dee done. I mean, he was reputed at hexing the Spanish Armada, so that they encountered a storm on their way to Britain, and they did after he'd created the hex. Now you could say, yeah, that's just the sea, everything like that. But hold on, let's just go into something else that he did. Shakespeare thought John Dee was absolute miracle. He worshipped John Dee, and Shakespeare was later on. He was after John Dee, the playwright Shakespeare, but he wrote John Dee as the character Prospero in The Tempest. In his play. It was that important to do that. In another play, which is well reputed, which was the Aristophanes play called Peace. Now I know Aristophane is related to Plato those years ago, so he wasn't in that time. But Aristophanes' play was presented at Trinity College in Cambridge, and John Dee made a clockwork beetle fly above the audience. This is in the 1500s.
We were far more advanced than they made us out to be.
This is in the 1500s. This is talking stuff that we see in Jason and the Argonauts, with the clockwork minotaur and everything like that. This is the same sort of technology he used. He made a clockwork beetle, a metal beetle, fly above an audience during a play at Trinity College, and was accused of witchcraft, of which his reply was, "I am in search of expansion of the mind." That's a pretty heavy thing. Another massive thing that he installed in our country, which we use today, he took the Julian calendar and decided that the Gregorian calendar was much more accurate, so they changed it. They changed it to the Gregorian calendar on John Dee's word. Yeah, and that's the calendar we use today. He chose the coronation date for Elizabeth I.
Well, yeah, the Julian calendar was the 7th, wasn't it, that Jesus was born?
That's right. And John Dee's the one that changed that, and they just changed it on his word. Yeah, John Dee said it, he's, boom, it's done. All these important figures that have been following things and through their family lineage and everything like that, and he comes along, pops along and goes, boom, it's done. Oh, yeah, it's done. How weird.
That's the influence he had. Very powerful.
Very, very powerful influence. So much so that, even his son Theodore, his youngest son, went on to be advisor for Charles I. Probably wasn't a very good advisor when you think of what happened to Charles I.
Yeah, right.
But, he was an advisor for Charles I. Of which, that's when the real heavy of the witch trials happened during Charles I. Just the influence this man had is just shocking. It's absolutely shocking. It really is. I keep looking and looking and looking, and it's like an ever-ending pit of what you find about this guy. He's everywhere. I mean, people look at there's a program out there at the moment that people were raving about several months ago on Netflix called Black Mirror, and people are like, "Oh, Black Mirror, have you seen Black Mirror?" The Black Mirror is a actual mirror. It's in the British Museum, and he used it to connect with spirits, along with Edward Kelly, when they used to stand in graveyards and supposedly talk to the dead, raise the dead and talk to them. Yeah, that's what the actual Black Mirror is.
That's fascinating. So not many people know that, do they? That's not common knowledge for anyone.
Like Michael Caine, then. Did you know that?
Oh, I've been told.
Yeah, I know. That's what I said.
You're the 5th person.
There's so many things that are around us today that we use every day that stemmed from John Dee. To touch back on his college thing, just before I go into witchcraft, people say about Isaac Newton discovering gravity.
Yes.
Yeah, and rewriting that. It wasn't. It was a study done by John Dee that he never actually fully completed. he never sadly got to complete it. He laid out all the mathematics and everything like that to do with gravity. And Isaac Newton, who was one of his students that took on from John Dee's works, got possibly a load of books that John Dee wrote and pieced it together and came up with the theory of gravity.
Well, we know that classical science, they had a cut-off point for a reason. So we didn't advance, spiritually.
Exactly that. One of the big things that is used every day in our society and has developed into technologies and everything like that is the fact that John Dee rewrote calculus. He's the one that put the plus, minus, times and divide symbols into calculating. Before that they used something like abacus, or they simply got objects and counted one against the other. They didn't actually use calculations, so he actually invented the calculations and installed it in the curriculums. All you got to do is put in the little links, the little pieces of the puzzle. When you think that John Dee was looking for silicon, he was in search of silicon, which took 400 years, which it did, and he went out and done these things looking for minerals and everything like that. He was in fear of people realising what we were doing. They had to hide the Anunnaki fact behind it. It couldn't come out.
Coming to the Anunnaki, though, if I cast my mind back to the story, it was Enlil, wasn't it, that came down and mined for gold. So it was all about the gold. That's what we're told, but it's not.
I think mining and everything happened way before that.
Right.
I'm not turning around and saying he invented mining, and I'm not turning around and saying he invented slavery. What I'm saying is that he created an absolute boom on it.
But this was the mineral. This was the main one. This is what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah. He absolutely exploded gold mining around the world. And diamond mining and all the mining, because when they went to search for minerals, they just sort of dug. And what they found were other minerals and everything, and it induced slavery to get slaves to work for it. Of course they done it for centuries before that, but they didn't do it to this scale.
So the real prize was silicon.
Yeah, the real prize was silicon, most definitely. And they were in fear. They were in fear of everybody figuring out, what was going on, because he knew it would take 400 years. And that's where the study of alchemy turned into doctrine.
Right.
So that they could get chemicals, stuff into us to sit on our frontal lobes, to sit on our pineal gland. And like I say, we can go back and say, but that was centuries and centuries before. Like I say, he just imagine you're listening to music on volume 2. He came along and cranked it up to 10.
Right. Yeah.
On everything. That's what this guy done. He just
exploded
these things. It just all went boom on every scale. They done witch hunting before. They've done witch hunting for centuries. Yeah, but not to the scale.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to that. It was nowhere near to the scale of what happened when he came along.
So, people with the whole Matthew Hopkins story, it's all about Matthew Hopkins. It's far more than that, isn't it?
Well, there's a reason why it is all pointed at Matthew Hopkins.
To distract from the real.
No. There's a much more reason, because they used to have witch hunting before, of course, and for centuries they've had witch hunting, but they decided to make it a kind of official thing, which Henry VIII certainly tried to do. Under the guidance of Roland Dee, is John Dee's father.
Right.
And what he done, they installed what's known as a witch finder. Now, don't get this confused with Matthew Hopkins, please. But they installed a witch finder in 1548. His name was George Gifford.
Right.
He was from Malden in Essex, and he was the first person to do the witch trials. He was the first one to start off this witch trials, all under the name of Roland, all under John Dee. But Henry VIII started this with Roland. Started this official thing into going into what we call the witch hunter. Now, George Gifford was 1548. John Darcell took over. He was a witch finder in 1586. And then along came Matthew Hopkins, who got officially named the Witch Hunter General by John Dee in the 1600s.
By John Dee. See, no one would know that.
He
It was him.
officially named by John Dee, but
Oh,
before
right,
John
okay.
Dee died, because John Dee died shortly before that, John Dee put an official title out there of Witch Hunter General.
Oh, right, okay.
Of which Matthew Hopkins was the first to accept the title, the official government title of Witch Hunter General.
But everything seems to just link back to John Dee all the time, doesn't it? He's got his fingers in all the pies, isn't he, as they say?
Yeah, I mean, people can that's just thing. But hold on a second. Let's look into this. Let's look into these witches, because in the time of George Gifford, John Darcell, and Matthew Hopkins, 785 supposedly witches got killed. Yeah, got trialed and burnt at the stake.
Definitely not witches. We know this, don't we?
Let's not forget, these were official counts. These weren't the unofficial ones, because the public used to take it into their own hands. All right, so this wasn't, these are the official witch hunter generals or witch finder cases. And they've done 785 killings of witches in Chelmsford.
My word.
In Essex, in surrounding areas. Where they actually done the trials was in Chelmsford, believed at Magistrates Court, the place where the Magistrate Courts now stand. It didn't stand there at the time.
Yeah.
But that's where trials took place, and in Pleshy also. The relevance of Pleshy, people never heard of Pleshy, just outside Chelmsford, but what it was a stop point. They used to transport the gold from London to Colchester for the King's Gold centuries ago on horse and cart, and Pleshy was the stop-off point where the horses would get rest and water. There'd been an overnight stop-off point, if you like, and that's where a lot of the witches would get taken to be trialled and killed there also. I saw a map many years ago of, I wish I could find it. I've searched and searched and searched the internet, but unfortunately I can't find this map. An old friend of mine had it, who was actually born in Pleshy, of a little map of Essex with all X's over it, where witches had been burnt at the stake.
Well, it was no win. It was no win for them when it came to the drowning pool.
It was absolutely no win. I'll give you examples of that, because it's just incredible.
If they floated, they would be executed.
This map that my friend Adam gave me, the X's on the map had little black X's all over Essex, and Chelmsford and Pleshy were just riddled. The map was near enough black with the amount of X's that were on it. To say it's this. I'm not boasting Chelmsford up, but there's something about this place, because John Dee himself went to school in Chelmsford, at King Edward's Grammar School in Chelmsford. Yeah, now he travelled all the way from London to go to school in Chelmsford. In the 1500s. Really? Why? When there's so many schools there, he came to Chelmsford. Well, the possible reason is because the King's Gold got transported from London to Colchester. So, Chelmsford was the stop-off point between the two. It's a very relevant place in a lot of things like that,
Absolutely. I was going to say, Mark, about the whole scenario of if the person was a witch. What did they do? It was absolutely ridiculous, wasn't it? Can you share that, please?
One account I saw was of a lady in Hatfield Peveril, again outside Chelmsford, and she had a cat. Now the witches we know are all linked to cats, and people go, that's mythology. No, truly they actually were. People were literally called witches because they had a cat. And to give an example of an official witch trial, a woman got killed, not because she was a witch, but she actually gave her cat, which was a fairly old cat she could no longer really look after. She gave it to other people, a mother and a daughter, and they accused her cat of bit of being under a spell of witchcraft because it made their cheese and milk go off.
Just absolutely absurd.
Now, not only did they get killed for witchcraft, but the woman that previously owned the cat got killed for witchcraft also.
Oh, word.
You know, there's accounts in Chelmsford of a witch being killed because their cat made their neighbours' cows drown. You know, and we've got old Dumpy out in Sybil Headingham. Now, I found the story out on old Dumpy. He's quite don't confuse that with Humpty Dumpty. That's a completely different thing. But old Dumpy was a man.
Yeah.
And just an old man. He was 83 years old. He was deaf and mute. And people saw him as different. You know, people saw him as weird. But they didn't kill him for that. What they killed him for is he travelled and he met a lady called Emma Smith, who was a prison, who ran her partner ran a pub. Old Dumpy spent a lot of times in pubs. Mm-hmm. But he feared that he wouldn't be accepted in this village. When he invited there, he said to her, no, I can't go. And because he couldn't communicate properly, she asked why not, and he drew a line across his neck as if to say that they'll kill me because people wouldn't accept him because he was so different. She accepted that as a friend and went back to this village and became ill. And they accused him of making her ill, doing that sign saying across the neck that she was going to die when he was actually trying to tell her, they will kill me because I'm different. Okay. And what they done, the local villagers came into the Swan pub in Sybil Headingham and they dragged old Dumpy out. And what they done is they literally chucked him in a pond to see if they would sink or swim, whilst pelting stones at him. You know, ridiculous. Yeah,
that's the whole witch. This is how to define a witch. Yeah, if you sink or swim, you couldn't win, could you? Because you're either going to sink or you're going to.
You especially couldn't win if you're getting hit in the head with bloody stones. You know, of course you're going to bloody drown if you get hit in the head with a stone.
Exactly.
You know, and they subsequently pulled old Drumpy out of the pool and then chucked whatever they chucked on him, you know, paraffin, whatever you want, and set him alight whilst chanting at him he was a witch. Now, that was just an 83-year-old man who was deaf and mute.
Yeah.
Who sought a friend, who found a friend. And that's what the public were like. Now, I want to put that into some context because we're looking at this in a historical context, yeah? But the same thing's happening out there today. You know, these people that are awakened to all this, they're being persecuted as if they're some sort of witch and the public's turning on them. And pretty soon, trust me, the public will be given powers to point these people out and even apprehend them because it's happened before. You know, it happened before. It happened in the start of the Roman Empire, the first few hundred years of the Roman Empire. Yeah, Christians were persecuted, absolutely persecuted for not following the faith. And the reason they didn't follow the faith is because to prove their faith of Christianity, they had to let an authoritative figure have sex with their children once a year. So they used to hide underground, and pagan people used to scratch their heads going, why are Christian worshippers living underground in fear of Christians? That was the reason why.
Yeah.
You know, coming back to John Dee, a little thing on John Dee, which might spark another little thing in people's heads. But this colonisation of the British Empire was known as the New World. New World Order springs to mind. It's happened. Everything we see has happened over and over, and it's in history, and it's
history repeating.
Well, the weird thing about today is everything's flipped. Just to give evidence of the reverse psychology. Hundreds of years ago, when all these witch trials went on with Matthew Hopkins and everything like that, witches were actually made pretty much like slaves were as well in the black slave trade. They were made to wear a metal cast over their head, which held a bit in their mouth so they couldn't talk to people. That identified them as a witch in order to stay away from. Yeah, so they had to wear masks. Now, to flip the script today, it's not the witches wearing the masks. It's the normal people wearing a mask. So that's completely reversed on its head. But it's the same sort of principle as they want to muzzle the people
We see what
who
they done
probably have
there,
a
kind of
voice.
thing. We see what they did there.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You know, it's a muzzle to muzzle their voice. You know, it happened in the time of the witches. Like I say, you can
Yeah,
look it up on the
slavery. Yeah,
internet. Please, people, look it up. You know, these torture devices that were put on people's heads and a bit put in their mouth so they cannot talk.
but
And they had
slaves
to
did actually have masks put over their mouths though as well, didn't they? Like now,
actual
there
masks.
was
Yeah,
that as well. Yeah,
they did. Yeah, simply because they probably didn't have enough of these metal things to go over. You know, they
silence
simply didn't.
mechanism. Yeah,
They simply didn't have it. You know, people don't know the extent of the cruelty that was hidden there. You know, and a lot of the cruelty, the sadistic cruelty. Again, you know, this is an important thing. Is linked to children. Yeah, and to put it how subtly they do it and how cleverly they do it. Look at nursery rhymes. Look up nursery rhymes. Look up the meanings
oh,
of nursery
absolutely.
rhymes. Just to pull one up is the one which is relevant to John Dee. Mary, Mary, quite contrary.
Right. Yeah.
Now everybody thinks it's just a lovely little nursery rhyme. Yeah. You know, say it in your head. Mary, Mary, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and pretty maids all in a row. Sounds beautiful, doesn't it?
Yeah. Go on. Dissect it.
The silver bells.
Yeah.
The silver bells are actually in reference to thumb clamps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Mary Queen of Scots went abroad to France, and what they used to do was they used to pull out the local prisoners and put them on display on the parade that she would pass through.
Yeah.
Yeah, some sort of power thing. Yeah, for her to feel powerful while she went past them. And people used to sit there, and the silver bells were thumb screws that the prisoners would sit there with their thumbs literally in clamps. People, you know, you may be familiar with the thumb screws of torture.
Yes.
The cockle shells were actual, like, you know, the handcuffs that went around the feet, the shanacles, if you want. Yeah.
Yes.
That locked people in. Of course, they were in a D shape, like a cockle shell. And the pretty maids all in a row were iron maidens that hang from poles with people standing in them.
Cool.
Yeah. So that nursery rhyme then got put to children to display as some sort of wonderful, lovely nursery rhyme.
Oh, incredibly sinister. And then you got ring of roses, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down. And how gaily we do it.
Yeah, it's,
you know, and it's always smiles.
And every
that's what we did at school. We did that at school.
They all have these relevance of sinister ism in the background of it.
Yeah, well, if you go to the folklore, Mark, you've got, you know, Little Red Riding Hood and the whole thing with the paedophilia and the wolf.
Yeah. You know, there's every nursery rhyme has a very sinister thing. You know, in the older nursery rhymes in particularly, but it's weird how they focused on hiding the history amongst children.
Yeah.
You know, they use children to cover it up. Oh, you know, we do it. The children, the lovely children. You know, what are they doing today? You know, they're even sort of targeting the children today. You know, in various different angles, various different forms. You know, they are
psychologically.
Every angle is you know, at the moment, protect your family, look after your children, blah blah blah. You know, and people were adhering to it.
Yeah.
You know, and they did back then. The people adhered to it back then. Like I say, you know, I've got accounts of official 785 women that died during that time of those two witch finders and that one witch hunter general during that time. By no means is that all and everything. You know, these witch hunts went on all over Europe. You know, John Dee travelled Europe and installed that amongst Europe that we were doing the witch hunt. You know, that was his thing. That was part of his mission to get that out there and get it as an official thing around Europe. But a lot of people, like I say, took it in their own hands to do this. So by no means is the 785 an accurate thing. It's just the official trials were 785 people. You know, let alone the thousands of people that got locked up. You know, even after Matthew Hopkins' time as the official witch hunter general, it then switched over to, it transpired over to America, where you've got the Salem witch trials in 1692, just after Matthew Hopkins' time.
Yeah.
You know, so, it really went boom, and it was because of, the Dee family that this happened. You know, I'm painting John Dee in a bad light here, and I want to try and flip that a little now, because people go, "Oh, he's a Satanist. The man was pure evil."
Yeah.
The man was an incredibly clever guy. He was a philosopher. He was used under the monarchy. You know, he was an antiquarian. You know, he was just brilliant. You know, he was a brilliant mind. I don't hate the guy. I admire the guy. The reason being is because he's known as a grey. Yeah, he's got grey power, which means he can use white, he can use light, and he can use dark equally. Right. Yeah, he's one of the only people in history that could use both comfortably and equally. I can't think of anybody else that is managed to do that. Even the great Aleister Crowley. But yeah, you know, he used the light and dark purposely, and when he was all used up, him and Edward Kelly went on travels over into Europe, doing their talks and everything like that. And Edward Kelly made the claim, the biggest boast of all, that he could turn iron into gold, which was a silly claim because the King of Russia at the time, the Tsar, actually imprisoned him until he actually achieved it, of which he didn't. He admitted that he couldn't achieve it, and they chopped his ears off because he couldn't achieve it, of Edward Kelly. But whilst they were over in Europe, John Dee got stripped because he'd done everything he could for, like, his purpose. His purpose was done in their order. He'd put everything in place. He'd done everything. He tried, you know, he'd done everything. And when he came back to Britain, his house and belongings, his library, got completely dispersed. It got ransacked. Everything got taken. Yeah, they took all his years of writings and knowledge and everything got completely taken away from him. And he got angered by that because he'd had his back turned on. You know, everybody had turned his back on him when he was such a prominent, important figure. He suddenly was no one. He was nothing. He was John Doe. Yeah, and he ended up living his life in solitude. Lived out his life in solitude with his wife in Mortlake in London. He died. I mean, his wife and children died at the turn of the 1600s. At the very turn of the 1600s, his family died his wife and children died. Not Theodore. Theodore went on to work for Charles I as his advisor. Like I say, it didn't go well. But right. The rest of his wife and children died in 1605, and John Dee himself died in 1609 from the plague. Now, how did he die of the plague? What year was the plague?
66.
So how did he die of the plague when it wasn't even about? Him and his family died of the plague. His whole entire family, apart from Theodore, died of the plague. He ended up his life talking to the light angels, the angels of light.
Right.
And that's where he developed this language of Enochian that he wrote, that is still yet today to be deciphered. You got to look at history, because everybody turns around and goes, "Oh, he done this made up language of Enochian." Okay, was it made up? No, it was termed and made up. It was a very, very clever device of talking to angels. And, you know, it's in relevance to the Book of Enoch. You know, it's all in relevance to talking with angels. Well, of course it's made up, isn't it? Yeah. we're all going to be told that this Enochian language is made up.
Well,
it's very hard to decipher. I really would. If you've got viewers out there, I mean, I'm not an intelligent guy. What I mean by intelligent, I'm not an educated guy.
you're well versed.
You know, I was a dropout of school, never went to university, college. You know, I really aren't.
The thing is, you've got more knowledge than some of the people that go to university, because it's all a con.
I'm extremely knowledgeable, but I'm hoping there's listeners out there that are extremely more knowledgeable in ancient language and scripture, because I really would like some guys to have a look at Enochian, this mystical language. You can look it up. You can go on Google and happily type in Enochian and come up with images, and you'll see all of John Dee's writings in Enochian on there.
Well, everyone's got to unlearn to relearn, haven't they? That's where we are now. There's no getting away from it.
Another thing John Dee created, which is, I don't know the purpose of it. Perhaps a viewer or a listener might, come up with some sort of relevance for it. But people talk about the seal of God. You might be familiar with it yourself. Well, the actual seal of God is an object created by John Dee that sits in the British Museum. You know, and it's like this big tablet with loads of occult, like satanic symbolism on there. Like it's got a 9-pointed star, a 6-pointed star, a 5-pointed star, a 7-pointed star on it, and it's got all of Enochian writing all over it.
Well, no doubt that's all been hijacked because they've inverted everything. That's good.
Yeah, you know,
to use for bad.
That is the actual seal of God. You know, when people talk about that, again, a thing that's come from John Dee, you know, he really was quite just an amazing person from history. You know, I say, you know, I said to you
very fascinating story.
I said to you before his podcast, you know, I sit here with so much wealth of information on the guy in front of me. Of which I've looked into, you know, of his importance of, you know, the choosing the date for the coronation for Elizabeth I. I mean, who the bloody hell does that?
Yeah.
You know? But, you know, I've literally only touched on what this guy's done. You know, it's not even the things that he done. I've probably just even scratched the surface. I've probably scratched the very important surface of him.
Yeah, it's been very informative.
There's some information out there for hopefully a lot of listeners to listen to, and hopefully a lot of people to research and look into, especially the Enochian. I would really like someone to give some feedback on that.
Yeah,
thank
fantastic.
you for giving me this opportunity. Anyway, it's a great pleasure.